Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Rui Pedro, a boy of merely 11 years old, asked his mother for permission to go for a car ride with his friend Afonso Dias. Filomena, worried about the request, denied it and suggested that her son play in the field behind the office where she worked. At 6 o'clock that same day, the telephone rang. It was Rui's tutor, informing them that the boy hadn't attended his class. Rui's bicycle was found abandoned, hidden among the bushes in the field where he should have been playing. From that moment, a desperate search would begin that would last for decades, with the boy being seen again only years later in obscure forums on the dark web. Stay until the end to understand how a simple request from a child to go for a car ride with a friend transformed into one of Portugal's most disturbing cases, involving an international pedophile network, alarming police failures, and a mother who, even 24 years later, still maintains her son's room exactly as he left it on that fateful day in March of 1998. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take this opportunity to subscribe now and activate the notification bell to not miss any case as impactful as this one. But to fully comprehend this tragedy, we need to travel back in time and learn who Rui Pedro was. Rui Pedro Teixeira Mendonça was born on January 28, 1987, bringing happiness to his parents Manuel and Filomena Teixeira. Together with his sister Karina, 3 years younger, he lived what appeared to be an idyllic life in the small town of Lusada, in the Porto district of Portugal. He was an extraordinarily affectionate and joyful child. His passion for animals was so intense that he assembled a genuine collection of birds at home, having to distribute some to his grandparents due to lack of space. On one occasion, his sensitivity became evident when he constructed a treehouse for a squirrel he had rescued, becoming utterly devastated when the animal returned to the wild the following day. Beyond his love for animals, the boy possessed a creativity that impressed everyone around him. Filomena loved to proudly recount how he once improvised a television antenna using nothing but a fork. And like many other children his age, Rui Pedro harbored big dreams. He aspired to become a professional football player when he grew up. In 1995, a 21-year-old man named Afonso Dias began attending the driving school where Filomena worked. Coming from a modest background, Afonso was there to obtain his driver's license. No one could have predicted that this simple presence would become the central element of one of Portugal's greatest family tragedies. Initially, the connection appeared natural. Filomena, moved by the young man's difficult financial situation, began helping him with clothing and essential items. As a way of showing gratitude, Afonso started performing small tasks at the driving school to earn extra money. Gradually, he became a regular presence not only at the establishment, but also in the life of the Teixeira Mendonça family. The age gap between Afonso and Rui, 10 years, was justified by many due to the older one's behavior, considered immature. He has the same mental age as the children, people would say. This argument, combined with Afonso's apparent kindness, allowed him to steadily gain the family's trust, especially Filomena's. The level of trust reached such a point that Afonso was given permission to be alone with the children. Frequently, he was the one who took Rui Pedro and Karina to school. The friendship between him and Rui Pedro seemed special. In many people's eyes, they were like brothers. According to Afonso himself, they maintained a fraternal relationship. However, not everyone viewed this closeness favorably. Manuel, Rui's father, and Jose, the maternal grandfather, frequently expressed their discomfort with the situation. For them, it wasn't natural for an adult man to spend so much time with a child. The fact that Afonso smoked in the boy's presence only increased their concern. The warnings from the father and grandfather were not ignored. Filomena, respecting her husband's concerns, began imposing limits on the time Afonso spent with the children. This decision, apparently prudent, may have been the trigger for even more disturbing events. In the weeks preceding the disappearance, witnesses reported subtle changes in Afonso's behavior. He began to demonstrate a growing obsession with Rui Pedro, frequently asking about his whereabouts and activities. Karina herself, Rui's sister, later revealed that Afonso had started taking photographs of her and her brother, something he had never done before. What initially appeared to be an unlikely but innocent friendship began showing worrying signs. Secret meetings between Afonso and Rui, even after the restrictions imposed by the family, were reported by neighbors. Afonso's obsession with the boy became increasingly evident, although at the time these signs weren't interpreted as the prelude to the tragedy that was about to unfold. Later, during the investigations, it was discovered that Afonso had invited both Rui and his cousin João André to a disturbing encounter, to meet sex workers. This invitation, made to children of just 11 years old, would prove to be merely the tip of the iceberg of a much darker story. The proximity between Afonso and the Teixeira Mendonça family, built over 3 years, created a false sense of security that would ultimately prove fatal. The controversial friendship between a 21-year-old man and an 11-year-old boy would reach its tragic climax on March 4, 1998. What began as an ordinary Wednesday in Lusada, Portugal, would transform into day zero of one of the most disturbing cases in Portuguese criminal history. Around 2 o'clock, after lunch, Rui Pedro made his last documented visit to his mother's office at the driving school. The objective was simple: to ask permission to go for a car ride with Afonso Dias, the same friend who, in recent weeks, had shown a growing obsession with the boy. Filomena, following both her maternal intuition and the concerns previously expressed by her husband and father, denied the request. As an alternative, she suggested that her son play in the field behind the office, an area that, although surrounded by main roads, was considered safe and commonly used by local children. The sequence of events that followed remained subject to intense judicial scrutiny. 3 boys who were playing football in the field provided crucial testimony. Around 3 o'clock, a black Fiat Uno entered the dirt track. The driver was unmistakably Afonso Dias. Rui Pedro, after a brief conversation, entered the vehicle, leaving his bicycle behind. This testimony was later corroborated by a local firefighter, who also positively identified Afonso as the driver. The Fiat Uno in question belonged to Afonso's brother. According to later records, Afonso had requested to borrow the vehicle under the pretext of taking it for an annual government inspection, an appointment that never materialized. This detail would become yet another suspicious element in an increasingly complex plot. At 6 o'clock, the phone rang in Filomena's office. Rui's tutor was calling to inform that the boy hadn't shown up for his 5 o'clock class, an unprecedented absence, especially considering that these classes were essential to help him with his epilepsy condition. This call triggered the beginning of a search that would extend for decades. The mobilization was immediate. Neighbors, family members, and friends spread throughout the village in search of any sign of the boy. It was during these initial searches that a disturbing discovery emerged. Rui's bicycle was strategically positioned among tall bushes, in an arrangement that suggested a deliberate attempt at concealment. A neighbor reported having noticed the bicycle in that location around 3 o'clock, timing that perfectly coincides with the reports of Rui being seen entering Afonso's car. When questioned by the police, Afonso presented a version that directly contradicted multiple testimonies. According to him, he had seen Rui for only 5 minutes, between 1:50 and 1:55 p.m., before driving alone to the neighboring city of Pacos de Ferreira. He claimed to have parked in front of a pharmacy, remained in the vehicle for an undetermined period, and later walked through the city observing shop windows. Later, he allegedly headed to Fremont, where his girlfriend lived, arriving at 6:45 p.m. It was only at this moment, according to his account, that his sister informed him about Rui's disappearance. A particularly unsettling detail emerged during the initial interrogation. When confronted by Rui's grandfather, Jose, who offered a considerable amount of money for information about his grandson's whereabouts, Afonso began to cry and made an enigmatic declaration. He said that if they wanted to find Rui, they should close the borders. This suggestion that the boy might be being transported out of the country would acquire an even more sinister significance in the years to follow. Afonso's behavior during the first hours of the investigation caught the investigators' attention. He demonstrated an unusual calmness when denying his involvement, but became visibly disturbed when confronted with specific testimonies. Particularly revealing was his reaction to the testimony of Rui's cousin, João André, who disclosed that days before the disappearance, Afonso had invited both him and Rui to meet with prostitutes. A revelation that provoked an aggressive reaction from Afonso, who attempted to intimidate João André into silence. March 4, 1998 ended without answers, only with the haunting echo of a mother who had lost her child. Night fell over Lusada, but for the Teixeira Mendonça family, a darkness was beginning that would last for decades. The next confirmed sighting of Rui Pedro would occur only years later, under terrible circumstances, in obscure forums on the dark web, revealing an even darker fate than anyone could have imagined on that fateful Wednesday. The negligence with which Portuguese authorities conducted the Rui Pedro case would become one of the most revolting aspects of this tragedy. Even with multiple testimonies pointing to a kidnapping, the police insisted on treating the case as a simple disappearance, as if the boy had merely gotten lost and would soon return. The Republican National Guard, GNR, upon receiving the report, demonstrated a concerning lack of urgency. They didn't isolate the area where the bicycle was found, didn't collect fingerprints from the suspect vehicle, and didn't even trace the mysterious call received by Filomena, where a child, with a voice identical to Rui's, was desperately screaming for his mother. One of the most shocking episodes of the investigation occurred when Filomena was harassed by one of the judicial police inspectors during the initial investigations. The family would only discover years later that Portugal had specialized forensic units, resources that were never mobilized for the case. Even when evidence emerged that Rui might be being taken out of the country, the authorities didn't activate border control. The police also refused to perform age progression on Rui's photos until 2007, maintaining circulation only with images of him at 11 years old, a decision that greatly hindered possible identifications. When a source informed about a boy in a restaurant who had said, "I was also kidnapped. I'm from Famalicão and nobody's looking for me," the authorities didn't even investigate the tip. At another crucial moment, an anonymous call mentioned having seen Rui at a hotel in Spain. Another lead ignored without any verification. An internal report, discovered only years later, revealed that several officers had refused to register reports that arrived after business hours, prioritizing administrative matters over the life of a missing child. As the investigation progressed, new crucial testimonies began to emerge, painting an even more disturbing picture of the case. The most impactful testimony came from Alcina Dias, a sex worker who worked on National Road 106, near Lustosa. Alcina revealed that, on that fateful afternoon, a man in a black car stopped beside her offering €10 for her to have relations with a boy. The child, whom she later identified as being Rui Pedro through newspaper photos, was visibly disturbed and crying. Showing compassion, Alcina took the boy to a more private area, where they talked for about 15 minutes. During this time, she didn't touch him inappropriately, only tried to calm him down. The boy revealed that the man was his uncle and that he was being forced to visit sex workers against his will. In a significant turning point during the trial in 2011, Alcina, who had never seen Afonso in person before, immediately identified him in court as being the man who was with Rui that day. The identification was even more impactful because she hadn't made any prior effort to see Afonso, even though she had spoken with authorities on 3 different occasions. The investigation also revealed that in the weeks before the disappearance, there were several attempts by Afonso to lure other children. Several minors from the region reported similar invitations, always involving car rides and suspicious promises. In September 1998, 6 months after Rui Pedro's disappearance, an international operation combating cybercrime discovered one of the largest and most disturbing child exploitation networks ever recorded, the Wonderland Club. This discovery would add an even darker dimension to the already tragic case of the Portuguese boy. The Wonderland Club operated in an era when the internet was still in its infancy, long before the emergence of the dark web as we know it today. It was a meticulously structured organization with an extremely restricted access system. To become a member, the candidate needed to be recommended by someone who already belonged to the group and contribute a minimum of 10,000 files at the time of their entry, a requirement that evidenced the systematic and organized nature of this criminal network. The magnitude of the operation shocked even experienced investigators. During the seizures, hundreds of thousands of media containing images and videos of more than 1,200 children being exploited were confiscated. It was, until then, the largest organized pedophilia scheme ever recorded in human history. Among the confiscated material, investigators found evidence that directly connected Rui Pedro's case to this international network. Not only photographs were discovered, but also an explicit video involving the Portuguese boy. To confirm his identity, a specialized facial mapping program was used, which compared the images with photographs of Rui before his disappearance. One of the most devastating aspects of this discovery was the identification process. The Teixeira Mendonça family had to go through the painful procedure of examining the material to confirm if that child was really Rui. For Filomena, it was an agonizing moment of confirmation. Her son was alive when those images were made, but under terrible circumstances. Among those detained in the operation was Jevon Sears, a 29-year-old man. On his computer, images were found of a boy identified as Billy, who would later be recognized as being Rui Pedro. In 2001, after the compilation of a database with victims' faces, international authorities definitively established the connection between Billy and Rui Pedro. The discovery of the Wonderland Club revealed the existence of a criminal network that extended across more than 30 countries. The members not only shared illegal material but also organized themselves to produce new content, suggesting a sophisticated international child trafficking operation. The case gained even more complexity when Ian Baldock, Sears' accomplice, was interrogated by Interpol. Both denied knowledge about the origin of Rui Pedro's images, and due to the quality of photographs at the time, it was impossible to determine precisely when or where they were produced. The connection with the Wonderland Club transformed Rui Pedro's disappearance from a local case in Portugal to a crime of international dimensions. This discovery also shed light on a disturbing aspect of the case. Afonso Dias' initial declaration about closing the borders now acquired a much more sinister meaning. Today, Rui Pedro remains on the list of the few children positively identified among the victims of the Wonderland Club. The discovery of this connection, although providing crucial evidence about his fate after the disappearance, also brought to light the terrible reality that the boy had been inserted into an international child exploitation network. A revelation that, although painful, confirms that Rui was alive months after his disappearance in Lasada. In 2011, 13 years after Rui Pedro's disappearance, the case would finally reach the courts. A new investigation team in Porto, upon re-examining the initial statements, found sufficient evidence for Portugal's Central Department of Investigation and Penal Action to indict Afonso Dias for aggravated kidnapping. A crime characterized when the abduction lasts more than 24 hours, involves a minor under 18 years of age, or is committed by a group. The trial, held at the District Court of Lasada, included more than 50 witnesses. One of the most striking situations was Afonso's attempt to avoid his presence in court. He presented an unusual justification. He claimed that he couldn't miss so much time from his work as a truck driver. When this strategy failed, he requested psychological tests, claiming to have cognitive difficulties that prevented him from situating himself in time and space. Both requests were denied. During the process, the defense presented a new and surprising line of argument. According to them, Afonso was being used as a scapegoat due to pre-existing family tensions, specifically an alleged jealousy that Manuel, Rui's father, supposedly had of Afonso's relationship with his wife and son. This theory was vehemently refuted by Manuel in his testimony. A crucial moment of the trial was the reconstruction of events. Judges, witnesses, and family members visited key locations in Lasada. Filomena and Karina, however, chose to remain in the car during the reconstruction, unable to relive that traumatic day once again. The first verdict, in February 2012, shocked Portugal. Afonso was acquitted of all charges. The jury decided to reject the prosecution witnesses' testimonies, including that of Alcina Dias, prioritizing the defense's argument that the last person to see Rui Pedro had been his own mother. The decision sparked spontaneous protests in front of the courthouse. The family appealed, arguing that the court had considered evidence that should have been excluded, such as the testimonies of 3 inspectors who had contributed little to the original investigation. These police officers had testified only to cast doubt on Alcina Dias's credibility, reinforcing prejudices against sex workers. In 2014, after an intense legal battle, a new trial was held. Filomena's health, already fragile, deteriorated further as the process approached. She needed to be hospitalized and fed through a tube to gather strength to testify again. The second trial brought a different verdict, though not entirely satisfactory. Afonso was found guilty of attempting to corrupt a minor and of being the last person seen with Rui Pedro. However, he was not convicted of kidnapping due to the alleged lack of direct evidence. The sentence: 3 years and 6 months in prison. In March 2015, after exhausting all possible appeals, Afonso finally began serving his sentence at Guimarães prison. However, due to his good behavior, he was released just 2 years later, in March 2017. Before his imprisonment, Afonso gave a television interview that caused public outrage. With disturbing calmness, he stated he regretted nothing except getting involved with the Teixeira Mendonça family. He even suggested that the real culprit remained unpunished. When questioned about his enigmatic suggestion to close the borders on the day of the disappearance, he dismissed the comment as mere irony. After his release, Afonso returned to normal life, married, and had a child. In subsequent interviews, he continued maintaining his innocence, claiming he had served time for a crime he didn't commit. When confronted about his family's safety in the face of public indignation, he expressed concern about possible retaliation, although he stated he would continue believing that Rui Pedro was alive until proven otherwise. The most important questions remain unanswered. Where is Rui Pedro, and what was his true fate after that March afternoon in 1998? Share in the comments your thoughts about these questions that still haunt Portugal to this day. If this case touched you as it has touched so many others, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to not miss other cases that need to be remembered and discussed. Until the next case.